Welcome, dear dreamer, to another night with Whispers of the Night. This is a space for rest, a quiet corner where you can set down the weight of your day and drift into calm. Tonight, we share a story titled The Letter That Never Arrived. It begins not with loud events or hurried steps, but with stillness in a grandfather's study lined with shelves of forgotten books. Clara, our gentle storyteller, finds an old envelope resting between faded pages. It has no name, no destination, but the paper carries a faint warmth, as though the words inside are alive, waiting to be heard after all these years. This is a tale of unspoken feelings, of love never sent, and of promises that linger quietly in the spaces between memory and time. It is about how words, even when delayed, still hold the power to soften hearts and bring connection as you listen. Allow the rhythm of the story to wash over you like the patter of rain outside a quiet window. Let Clara's journey remind you that silence can be full of meaning, and that even what goes unsent may still find its way home. Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe to Whispers of the Night. By doing so, you'll always have a gentle story waiting here for you, ready to carry you into rest whenever you need it. So now, find a comfortable position, take a slow, deep breath, and allow yourself to unwind. Our story will begin soon, after a few moments of stillness and relaxation. Let's take a few moments to relax before we begin the story. Gently close your eyes. If you haven't already, take a slow, deep breath in and let it drift out. Notice the simple rhythm of your breathing. Inhale softly through your nose and exhale gently through your mouth. Each breath is like a tide, rising and falling, carrying away the heaviness of the day. Imagine that you are sitting in a cozy room on a rainy night. The sound of droplets tapping against the glass is steady, soothing, like nature's own lullaby. A candle glows beside you, its light flickering faintly, casting soft shadows across the room. With each breath, imagine your body sinking deeper into comfort. Your shoulders soften, your arms rest heavily by your side, and the muscles in your face loosen into stillness. The air is cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth. It is quiet here, except for the whispers of rain. As you continue to breathe slowly, picture yourself holding an old letter, sealed, untouched, yet humming with gentle warmth. You do not need to open it yet. Just feel its presence, weightless and timeless. A message of love, waiting to be carried across the silence of years. Let that thought rest with you now, breathing in calmness, breathing out release. You are safe, you are warm, and you are ready to drift into the world of the story. The letter that never arrived. The unopened envelope. Clara had always loved her grandfather's study. It wasn't the sort of room most children found inviting. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and pine polish. The curtains were drawn so often that the sunlight only managed to slip through in thin golden slices, leaving much of the room in a library hush. Shelves bent under the weight of books that hadn't been disturbed in decades, their spines cracked, their titles worn down to near illegibility. To most visitors, the study was a place of dust and shadows, too silent, too serious. But to Clara, it was a treasure chest. She was the kind of girl who listened more than she spoke, who noticed the way dust danced in the light when others only saw emptiness. Her grandfather had passed away 2 winters ago, and though the rest of the family had busied themselves clearing his bedroom and the downstairs parlor, they had left the study alone. "We'll get to it someday," her mother often said, shaking her head as if the mere thought of the room was too heavy. Clara was glad for that. It meant the room remained as he had left it, his pipe resting cold on the little porcelain tray, his spectacles folded on the desk, and his favorite blanket still draped over the leather chair. Sometimes, when she slipped inside and closed the door softly behind her, she could almost believe he had just stepped out for a moment and would return any second, humming softly under his breath. Rain pressed gently against the windows, making the glass quiver with silvery trails. Clara carried a notebook under her arm, thinking she might sketch the way the droplets raced each other down the pane. But as she crossed to the far shelves, her fingers grazed over the rows of books in their varying states. She felt a small tug of curiosity. One book sat crooked, leaning forward ever so slightly, as though it wanted to be noticed. Its cover was a faded maroon, the gilt lettering nearly erased. Clara slid it free. Dust puffed into the air, tickling her nose. She coughed lightly, then sat down on the rug, folding her legs beneath her. The book itself wasn't remarkable. Its pages smelled musty, the print a little blurred. She turned a few expecting notes in her grandfather's looping handwriting, but instead found something else, a corner of paper peeking out from the middle. Out of place among the printed text, her breath caught. Clara pinched the paper carefully and pulled. What came free was not just a scrap or bookmark, but an envelope. It was cream-colored, though time had yellowed it at the edges. The flap was still sealed, the wax brittle but unbroken. The front bore no name, no address, not even the faint ghost of ink where one might have once been written. Only a few faded smudges lingered, as if whoever had held it had done so often. Almost tenderly, Clara turned it over in her hands. Her pulse quickened the way it did before she opened a present, though she had the strange sense that this was something else entirely. Not a gift meant for her, but something forgotten, waiting. The paper was warm. That was the first thing she noticed, and it startled her. Not warm from her own fingers, but warm as if it had been resting by a fire, though the study's hearth was long cold. She pressed it to her cheek. The sensation was soft, not uncomfortable, but oddly alive. Her thoughts tumbled. Who had written it? Why had it been hidden in a book? Why was it sealed but never addressed? She thought of her grandfather. He had been a quiet man, fond of riddles and small, peculiar traditions. He used to fold origami birds out of newspaper, letting them perch on the mantelpiece until the edges curled. He had also carried secrets in the way only old men could, not cruel ones, but little mysteries that never seemed urgent to unravel. Was this envelope one of them? Clara held it up to the light, squinting to see if the paper was thin enough to reveal its contents. A faint shadow of lines appeared, like the suggestion of words waiting inside, but no amount of tilting revealed more. She considered opening it. Her fingernail traced the brittle line of wax at the flap, but she stopped. Something about breaking the seal felt wrong, like waking someone from a long sleep before their dream had ended. Instead, she tucked it against her chest, listening to the rain's rhythm on the window, as though the storm outside were echoing her thoughts. Her grandfather's voice seemed to surface in her memory. Not every secret is meant to be solved the moment you find it, Clara. Some secrets are like seeds. They wait until the soil is ready. She had been 8 when he said that, after she discovered a locked wooden box in his desk. He never told her what was inside, only smiled, and one day the box disappeared. Perhaps the envelope was like that, a seed, waiting for the right time. Still, curiosity prickled at her like nettles. Clara rose and carried the envelope to the desk. She laid it on the blotter where her grandfather once did crosswords, the leather worn smooth from years of elbows resting there. She imagined him tucking the envelope into a book, sliding it onto the shelf, perhaps with the hope someone, maybe her, would stumble upon it one day. But why not leave instructions? Why no address? The questions swirled. She pulled out her chair and sat, placing her chin in her hands. The envelope sat patiently, silently, as though it had all the time in the world. The rain deepened, pattering harder against the glass, and the room felt smaller, wrapped in the cocoon of weather and memory. Clara thought of her mother downstairs, bustling in the kitchen, unaware of the secret pressed between her daughter's hands. She thought of her grandfather's laugh, a deep, chesty chuckle that always ended in a cough. She missed it terribly. Her eyes stung, but she blinked quickly. No, she would not cry, not yet. Instead, she let herself imagine what might be written inside. Perhaps it was a love letter, never sent. Her grandfather had fought in the war when he was very young. Maybe he had written to a sweetheart who never received his words. Or maybe it was a letter to himself, a promise, or a confession he could never speak aloud. Clara's imagination spun wider. Maybe it wasn't her grandfather's letter at all, but something far older. A relic slipped into the book decades before he even owned it. Perhaps a stranger's words had traveled through time to land in her hands. She traced the seal again. Warm, always warm. The rain slowed, easing into a hush. The study felt suddenly charged, as though the air had shifted. Clara leaned closer. If she listened very carefully, she thought she could hear a hum, faint, like the buzzing of a bee trapped in a jar, or the echo of a distant note held too long. Her breath hitched, the envelope pulsed, just once, softly, like a heartbeat. Clara jerked her hand back, her chair scraping. The room returned to stillness. The envelope lay innocently where she had left it, pale pale and unassuming, as if nothing at all had happened. She waited, counted slowly to 10. Nothing. Finally, with trembling fingers, she reached forward again. This time, the paper was only warm. No pulse, no hum. "Did you do that?" she whispered, her voice small in the heavy room. The envelope, of course, gave no answer. Clara sat for a long while, simply staring. Shadows deepened as the afternoon slipped into evening. The rain stopped altogether, leaving the windows streaked with silver. Somewhere in the house, the clock chimed 6. Her mother called her for supper. Clara hesitated, torn between the ordinary world of stew and bread and the extraordinary mystery glowing faintly in front of her. At last, she slid the envelope back into the maroon book and returned it carefully to the shelf. It seemed safer there for now, hidden but not lost. As she closed the study door behind her, Clara made a quiet promise. She would return tomorrow, and the day after that, until she understood the secret her grandfather, or fate, had left for her. Because some stories waited to be told, and this one had chosen her. Whispers of Ink. The night after Clara first found the envelope, she dreamed of paper. She dreamed of white sheets fluttering through the air like doves, of ink that spilled itself into words without a hand to guide it, of letters drifting down a river that had no end. When she woke, her pillow was damp with dew-like tears, though she did not remember crying. The image of the envelope glowed in her mind, warm as if it had lain beside her through the night. Porridge, as her mother chatted about errands and neighbors. Clara's thoughts circled back, always, to the study upstairs. By the time the dishes were washed and her mother was occupied in the garden, Clara slipped away quietly, her heart quickening with every step toward the heavy wooden door. The study smelled the same as the day before: dust, leather, pine polish, and something faintly sweet like dried flowers. She closed the door softly behind her, sealing herself into the hush. The maroon book waited where she had replaced it, slightly crooked on the shelf, as though restless in its hiding. She pulled it free. The envelope slid out with a whisper, almost as if it sighed to be in the light again. Clara sat at the desk, placing it carefully before her, and studied it with a mixture of reverence and unease. The wax seal caught her eye, not ornate, just a simple circle, pressed flat, cracked faintly at the edges with age. She wondered if it would crumble to dust the moment she tried to break it. Yet she still did not open it. Something deep within her insisted she wait, though she couldn't explain why. Instead, she let her fingertips glide lightly across the surface of the envelope. The paper was warm again, that same steady warmth, as if it carried a heartbeat no one could see. She closed her eyes, tracing the faded surface, and that was when she heard it at first. It was no more than a breath against her ear, so soft she thought she had imagined it, a hush of sound, like the beginning of a word. She stilled, holding her breath. Then it came again, faint, broken whispers curling upward from the ink itself. Clara froze. The study was silent, Yet under her fingertips, the letter spoke. She leaned closer, pressing her hand more firmly to the paper. The whispers grew clearer, though fragmented, as if torn by distance or time. A low laugh, warm and tender, rolled through the silence. Then a few words, broken but distinct. The day was bright, promise, I will. Clara's eyes widened. Someone's voice, not her grandfather's, not anyone she knew, was woven into the fibers of the page. She shifted her fingers slightly, and the whispers changed. A softer tone now, threaded with affection. You must know more than words. Can her breath hitched. The air seemed alive around her, charged with invisible echoes. And then a pause, a long silence, filled with weight. When the voice returned, it was heavy with sorrow. Goodbye, forgive me. Clara drew her hand back as if burned. The envelope lay still, innocent, yet her ears rang with the ghost of those words. A goodbye, unsent. A farewell that had never reached the one for whom it was meant. Her heart pounded. She looked around the room, half expecting to see her grandfather's spirit leaning in the corner, watching. But the study was empty, save for dust and shadow. What are you? She whispered to the envelope. It did not answer, but she felt the warmth thrum faintly again, as though in acknowledgement. Clara's thoughts tumbled. The letter was not just paper and ink. It was memory, voice, love, captured and bound. Someone had poured not only words, but pieces of themselves into it. And those pieces lingered, waiting to be heard. But who had written? Was it her grandfather, long ago, or someone before him? Was the laughter the voice of a young man or a woman? She could not tell. The whispers were too faint, too scattered. Clara leaned forward again, hesitant, yet unable to resist. She brushed her fingertips lightly across the envelope once more, forever. Even if the world meets you where the trees bend, do not forget. The fragments clung to her mind like threads of a tapestry unraveling in her hands. She felt both comforted and unsettled. Comforted because the words were warm, filled with affection. Unsettled because she was listening to something private, something never meant for her. The study's silence pressed in around her. She pulled her hand back and pressed her palms together, as though praying. Her grandfather's words came back to her again, about secrets being seeds, waiting for the right soil. Perhaps he had known she would one day find this letter. Perhaps he had hidden it for her to discover, not so she would open it, but so she could listen. Yet why her? Clara closed her eyes. She thought of her grandfather's hands, calloused but gentle, turning the pages of books. She thought of the way he had always encouraged her to listen more than speak, to notice the small sounds others missed. The world whispers, Clara, he once told her, but only if you're patient enough to hear. Her chest tightened. Perhaps he had known she would be the one to hear the letter's whispers. She sat very still, listening, but the envelope remained quiet now, its warmth steady but silent. After a long while, she rose and paced the study. Her mind raced with questions. If this was a letter of love, whose love had it carried? Was it a goodbye to a sweetheart, to a friend, to family? And why had it never been delivered? The whispers she had heard were enough to stir her imagination. She pictured a young man standing in the rain, pen trembling in his hand as he wrote his farewell. She pictured a woman waiting beneath a willow tree, never receiving the words meant for her. Or perhaps it had been her grandfather himself, younger than she could ever imagine him, writing words too heavy to send. Clara shivered. The envelope sat patiently on the desk, but it no longer felt simple. It felt alive, as though watching her with invisible eyes. She leaned closer again and whispered, "Who are you for?" No voice answered, only the faint hum of rain gutters outside and the slow tick of the clock. Still, she thought she felt a stir of warmth beneath her fingertips, like a hand squeezing hers gently, as if to say, "Wait, and you will know." Clara returned the envelope to its book, sliding it carefully between the pages. She lingered, her hand resting on the maroon cover, reluctant to close it. But the voices had faded, and her head swam with too many questions for which she had no answers when she finally left the study. The rest of the house felt oddly bright, too normal, as though the whispers belonged to another world entirely. Her mother was in the kitchen, humming as she kneaded dough. The scent of flour and yeast drifted through the air. Clara hesitated in the doorway, watching her mother's hands press and fold the dough in steady rhythm. "Did you find a good book today?" her mother asked without looking up. Clara almost told her about the envelope, about the whispers, about the laughter and the goodbye that had broken her heart. But the words stuck in her throat. Something about the secret felt fragile, like a moth's wing, beautiful but easily destroyed if exposed too soon. "Yes," Clara said softly instead. "I did." That night, as she lay in bed, the whispers returned faintly in her mind. Not clear words this time, but the impression of warmth, of laughter half heard through a wall, of someone speaking her name even though they never knew her. She pressed her palms together and whispered back into the darkness, "I'll listen. I promise." The letter's secret was hers now, and somewhere between sleep and waking, Clara thought she heard one last fragment of ink-born voice. "Thank you for hearing me." The journey through the village. The morning broke, soft and golden, the kind of morning that made the village feel both new and ancient at once. Mist curled over the cobblestones, blurring the sharp lines of rooftops until they looked like brushstrokes on a painting. Clara rose early, the echoes of whispers still lingering in her mind, and dressed quietly so as not to wake her mother. She slipped the envelope from its hiding place in the maroon book, holding it close to her chest. For a moment she considered leaving it behind. What if someone else noticed the whispers? What if the letter's secret was meant only for her? But something tugged at her, gentle but insistent. The letter wanted to be carried, and so, with the envelope tucked safely in the pocket of her coat, Clara set out into the village. The market square was already stirring. Bakers set fresh loaves on their shelves, their warm scent spilling into the cool air. A milkman clattered past with bottles that chimed like glass bells. Old Mrs. Henley was sweeping her stoop, her broom scratching a rhythm on the stone. Everything looked as it always did, but Clara felt different. She felt as though she carried a lantern no one else could. See. Her fingers brushed the envelope. Warm, always warm. As she crossed the square, she passed Mr. Callum, the cobbler. He was a stout man with a permanent furrow in his brow, his hands stained with polish. He barely glanced at Clara usually, but today, when she greeted him softly, his gaze flicked to her pocket. His eyes widened, as if he had caught a glimpse of light through the fabric. He paused mid-step, staring into the distance. "Strange," he murmured. I remember now. When I was a boy, my father promised to take me fishing. I had forgotten it entirely, but I can see it clear as day. His hand on my shoulder, the way the river glistened, his voice cracked, and he chuckled awkwardly, brushing a hand across his face. Odd, isn't it? The things we forget. Clara's heart skipped. She nodded gently, but said nothing. She walked on, her pocket growing warmer with each step. Next, she passed the seamstress's shop. Young Eliza, the apprentice, was folding fabric bolts by the window. As Clara paused to watch, the girl looked up and gasped softly. "I never told him," Eliza whispered, almost to herself. "I never told my brother. I was proud when he left for the city. I only complained that he'd be too far away. Oh, how silly I was." Her eyes filled with tears, and she clutched a length of cloth to her chest, as if steadying herself. When she blinked, her gaze fell on Clara, though it was distant, unfocused, as if she looked through her rather than at her. Clara lowered her eyes and moved along. It continued. Everywhere she went, the blacksmith paused in his hammering to mutter, "I should have thanked old Harris for teaching me the craft. Never did." The florist arranging daisies on her stall whispered, "He said he'd return with roses." I thought I'd imagined it, but I remember his voice now. Even the children playing marbles in the lane stopped, their laughter fading into wonder as one boy murmured, "I promised her I'd keep the secret, and I never told anyone I remembered." Usually filled with the comfortable hum of everyday chatter, seemed transformed into a hall of echoes. Everywhere Clara went, the envelope tugged at hearts, unearthing forgotten words, promises, and goodbyes. She grew quiet as she walked, listening. She felt like a vessel carrying the letter's unseen magic, yet not entirely belonging to the moment herself. By midday, Clara stopped at the stone bench by the old fountain. The water gurgled softly, catching the sunlight. She slipped the envelope from her pocket and held it in her lap. "What are you doing?" she whispered to it. "Why are you making them remember?" The envelope, as always, gave no answer. But when she stroked its surface, the warmth deepened, and she thought she caught the faintest murmur, not of laughter or goodbye this time, but of sighs, like a collective breath being released from 100 hearts at once. Clara thought of what she had heard in the study, the fragments of love, promises, a farewell. The letter had not been opened, yet its words seemed to ripple outward, stirring other words that had been left unsaid in the lives it touched. Perhaps that was its purpose, not just to hold one story, but to awaken many. She tucked the envelope safely away again and continued her walk, drawn now toward the far edge of the village. Where the churchyard lay, the church was quiet, its bell tower rising solemnly into the sky. Clara hesitated by the gate, unsure why she had come here. But as she stepped onto the gravel path, the warmth in her pocket surged. She followed it instinctively until she reached the bench beneath the yew tree. There sat old Father Marin, the priest. His hands rested on his cane, his eyes half closed. He looked up as Clara approached, and for the first time she saw not sternness, but softness in his gaze. "My wife," he said suddenly, his voice rough with age. "I never told her enough. I spoke sermons to the whole village, but not enough to her. Strange how the heart holds its silences." Clara swallowed. She did not know what to say. She simply sat beside him, and together they listened to the fountain trickle, the sparrows dart, the quiet world stir with memory. After a long while, Father Marin smiled faintly. "Child, whatever you carry, guard it well. Some burdens are blessings." Clara's fingers brushed her pocket. The envelope was still warm. The walk home felt different. The village, though unchanged, seemed fuller, as if invisible threads had been woven between the people, tying them gently to their own forgotten truths. Clara realized the letter was not just hers to guard. It had touched everyone she passed, leaving them lighter, unburdened. Yet she could not shake the question: if a sealed, unopened letter could awaken so many unfinished connections, what would happen if she broke the seal? Would the single voice inside drown out the whispers of all the others? Or would it finally reveal the story that bound them all together? She paused at the edge of the square, looking back. The cobbler was laughing with a customer. The seamstress hummed as she pinned a hem. The children played again, brighter, freer. Clara pressed her hand to her pocket. The envelope pulsed once, like a heartbeat. She whispered, almost to herself, "You're not only carrying one story, are you? You're carrying everyone's." The wind lifted her hair, as if in gentle agreement, and as she stepped back into the quiet path leading to her home, Clara knew her journey with the letter was only beginning. The rain-soaked evening. The sky had been heavy all day, clouds sagging low, threatening to burst. By late afternoon, the first drops began, soft at first, then quickening into a steady curtain of rain that washed the village in silver. Clara sat by her bedroom window, chin resting on the sill, listening to the rhythm. The rooftops blurred under the downpour. The cobblestones glistened, and the garden below bent with the weight of water. She loved rain, usually. It lulled her into a calm like no other. But tonight, unease crept into her heart. The envelope lay on the desk behind her. She glanced at it again and again, as though it might vanish. Paper and water were enemies, she knew. One careless drop, and the words, the precious whispers bound inside, could be lost forever. And yet the letter seemed to breathe louder tonight, as if the storm outside called to it. When her mother called her down for supper, Clara only picked at her bread and stew, her thoughts elsewhere. "You're quiet again," her mother remarked. "Another book keeping you company?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. It was easier than explaining. Later, when the dishes were done and her mother had retired early with a lantern, Clara crept back upstairs. She closed her door, lit a single candle, and carried the envelope to the window. The rain lashed harder, rattling the glass. A fine mist seeped through the edges of the frame, cool on her skin. Clara pressed the envelope to her chest, whispering, "I'll keep you safe." But just as she thought to turn away, a drop of water squeezed past the window pane and landed directly on the envelope's surface. Clara gasped. She nearly dropped it, fumbling to blot it with her sleeve. Her heart thudded. What if the ink blurred? What if the whispers dissolved into silence forever? But then she froze. The warmth surged, stronger than ever before, and beneath her fingertips came not faint fragments, but a river of sound. The whispers were no longer broken, but whole. A voice unfurled, low and trembling, clear as if spoken into her ear. "My dearest," the words wove through her mind like music, not hurried, but deliberate, each syllable heavy with longing. "I do not know if these words will ever reach you. Perhaps they never should. I have carried them in silence, and silence has been both my punishment and my protection." Clara's breath caught. She clutched the envelope tighter, rain streaking louder down the window. But all she could hear now was the voice. "Do you remember the summer evenings when the fields burned gold and the air smelled of hay? I told you I would always walk beside you, no matter where the road turned. I meant it then. I mean it still. Yet the road grew dark, and I lost my courage. I let fear seal my lips." Clara's heart ached. She could picture him, the young man behind the voice, sitting with ink-stained fingers, fighting himself as he wrote. "You laughed when the larks rose. You leaned on the fence and spoke of tomorrow as though it would never end. I promised to write, but when I held the pen, I froze. What right had I to tie you to a man so unsure, so scattered by doubt?" The rain hammered harder, a drumbeat beneath the words. Clara leaned closer, her whole body trembling with the weight of his sorrow. "And so I wrote this farewell instead, not to bind you, but to release you. If you read this, know it is not because I lacked love, but because I loved too much and feared I would only harm you. Goodbye, my dearest. May your days be bright, and may you remember me only as a shadow who once walked beside you." The voice faltered then, thick with emotion, before ending with a whisper almost lost beneath the rain. "Forgive me, always, forgive me." Clara sat very still, the letter pressed to her palms, her cheeks damp, though she had not noticed the tears falling. The storm outside seemed to echo the storm inside her chest. She whispered into the candlelit room, but she never heard you. She never knew. The envelope pulsed faintly in response, as though acknowledging her grief. Clara rose and paced, the boards creaking under her bare feet. Her thoughts raced. Who was the young man? Who was the woman he had loved so fiercely, yet feared to reach? Could it have been her grandfather, long ago, writing to someone before he met her grandmother? Or was it someone else entirely, a stranger whose story had somehow slipped into their family's hands? She pressed the envelope to her ear again, but the voice had quieted. The rain softened to a steady patter, as though its work was done. The story had been told. For the first time since finding the letter, Clara felt the weight of it differently. It was no longer only a mystery. It was a confession, a wound sealed in paper, too tender to share, yet too heavy to bear alone. She curled onto her bed, hugging the envelope close, and let her thoughts wander. She imagined the young woman, perhaps waiting day after day for a letter that never came. She imagined her smile fading, her heart hardening against disappointment. And she imagined the young man carrying his silence to the grave, never knowing if his absence had broken her heart. The thought was unbearable. Clara whispered, "I heard you. At least someone did. Your words aren't lost." The candle flickered, throwing long shadows on the wall. The envelope's warmth lingered, softer now, like a hand resting on hers. She closed her eyes, listening to the rain's rhythm until it wove itself into the steady beat of sleep. When Clara woke the next morning, the storm had passed. The world outside shone as if newly washed puddles gleaming, leaves dripping diamonds, rooftops sparkling in the pale sun. She sat up slowly, the envelope still beside her, untouched by the rain despite the drop that had fallen. She lifted it and traced the faint spot where the water had touched. The paper was flawless, the ink within intact. It dawned on her then. The letter was not fragile at all. It had endured decades, hidden in a book. It had endured dust and time, and now it had welcomed the rain to reveal its truth. It was not something to be shielded. It was something alive, resilient, waiting. Clara rose and opened her window. Fresh air rushed in, cool and bright, filling her lungs. She held the envelope high toward the morning light. "Your words are safe," she whispered. "I will carry them. I'll remember for both of you." Down in the square, the village stirred awake. Clara knew that if she walked among them again with the letter in her pocket, more forgotten promises and half-said truths would bloom. But now she carried not only their echoes, but the heart of the story itself, a farewell to long unsent. And though she still did not know who the letter belonged to, she felt the first threads of a greater purpose tugging at her. The envelope was guiding her, step by step, for it was not finished yet. Delivering the unsent words. Clara woke the next morning to the gentle hush of wind stirring at her window. The rain that had poured the night before had left the earth glistening, a softened village washed clean. Drops still clung to the eaves of rooftops, sliding down in tiny rivulets, and the air was fragrant with the mingled scent of soil, wet wood, and wildflowers shaken awake by the storm. The letter lay on her bedside table. She had placed it there carefully, wrapped in a piece of cloth, as though it were something fragile, like glass or porcelain. Yet, when she unwrapped it, she found it unchanged, the ink still steady, the seal still firm, and a faint glow lingering about its edges. But Clara felt different. She carried in her chest a quiet urgency, as if she had been entrusted with a task that would not allow her to rest until it was done. The whispers of the night before still lingered in her ears, the farewell of a young man who had never managed to send his words. Clara had not only heard his confession of love, but had felt its weight. His longing had pressed upon her like the rain, heavy and undeniable. His silence had stretched across time, unbroken, waiting for someone to listen. And Clara realized that perhaps the letter had not chosen to fall into her hands for her sake alone. It had carried its silence for too long. It wanted to be heard. That morning, Clara stepped outside, clutching the envelope gently against her chest. The sun had broken through the thinning clouds, and shafts of light filtered down, striking the cobblestones of the village square until they shimmered like wet mirrors. She walked slowly, her shoes making soft taps on the stones, the hush of the world around her amplifying the sound of her own breathing. The villagers greeted her as they always did. Mrs. Alder, the baker's wife, lifted her flour-dusted hand in a wave. Old Mr. Barrow nodded from his seat on the bench by the fountain, his pipe unlit but held loosely between his fingers. The children who had been chasing puddles stopped for a moment, curious to see Clara walking with such purpose. Normally, Clara would smile, perhaps say a few soft words, and move on quietly. But today, she carried more than her own presence. She carried a story, unfinished and waiting. And somehow, though no one else knew what she held, they seemed to sense it. Heads turned as she passed. Conversations paused. It was as if the letter's silence had stretched into the air, drawing people toward her, waiting for the release of what it held inside. At the fountain, Clara stopped. She stood still for a long moment, looking down into the rippling water where the morning light scattered in trembling patterns. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the letter, unwrapping it from the cloth. The faint glow had not faded. If anything, it seemed brighter in the daylight, soft and golden, like the last rays of the setting sun, preserved in paper. People began to gather. They came not out of curiosity alone, but because something in their hearts told them to come closer. Mrs. Alder wiped her hands on her apron and drew nearer. The children clustered together, eyes wide. Mr. Barrow rose slowly from his bench, leaning on his cane, his gaze fixed on the envelope, as if recognizing something he had lost long ago. Clara's voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. "There is a letter," she said, holding it where they could see, "that was written long ago but never delivered. It has waited in silence, and last night it spoke. It spoke of love, of farewell, of words someone carried in their heart but never had the courage to share." The villagers shifted uneasily, their expressions softening. Some looked at the ground, others blinked against the morning sun, as if suddenly seeing the weight of their own unsent words reflected back at them. Clara continued, "This letter does not belong to me. It belongs to all who have ever held back words meant to be spoken, kindnesses left unsaid, goodbyes left unfinished, and it asks to be carried, to be heard, not just for the one who wrote it, but for all of us." For a long while, no one spoke. The fountain gurgled softly, and the sound of water mingled with the rustling leaves. Then Mrs. Alder stepped forward. Her hands were trembling as she wiped at her eyes. "My mother," she whispered, "died before I ever told her I forgave her. We had so many arguments in those last years. I thought there would be time. There wasn't, and I've carried that silence for so long." Her voice broke, and she covered her mouth. The letter pulsed faintly in Clara's hands, as though it absorbed Mrs. Alder's confession, weaving her silence into its own. Old Mr. Barrow, leaning on his cane, spoke next. "When I was a boy," he said, his voice rough with years, "I promised a friend I'd come back after the war. I didn't. He never knew why. He died thinking I'd forgotten him. I never forgot. I just never found the words to explain." The letter glowed brighter. Clara felt a warmth spread through her palms, as though the paper itself had grown lighter with every truth revealed. One by one, voices rose. A young woman confessed that she had never told her sister how much she admired her strength. A boy admitted that he had stolen a marble from a friend and had always wanted to return it, but never had the courage. An old woman whispered that she had once been in love with a man who left, and though she wished him happiness, she never told him. The square filled with the sound of voices, soft, halting, but genuine. Words, unspoken. Words carried to long in silence. And through it all, the letter glowed steadily, like a lantern, burning brighter as more fuel was fed to its flame. As the confessions poured out, Clara felt her own heart tightening. She had come to carry the letter for others, but now it asked something of her as well. She thought of her grandfather's study, where she had first found the envelope tucked between the pages of a forgotten book. Her grandfather had always been kind but distant, a man of gentle silences and unfinished thoughts. He had died before Clara had ever told him how much his quiet presence had shaped his stories, even the ones left incomplete, had been the compass of her childhood. She had never said thank you, never said goodbye properly. Her throat ached as she lifted her gaze to the villagers. "My silence is this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never told my grandfather how much I loved him. I thought I would have years. I thought I would always have more time. But the days slipped away, and when he was gone, the words stayed with me. They still do." The glow from the letter flared so brightly, it illuminated the faces gathered in the square. And in that moment, Clara felt a weight lift, not only from her, but from the people around her, as if the letter was not only listening, but gathering, absorbing, and dissolving the burden of silence from every heart. When the last voice had spoken and the square fell quiet again, the letter began to change. Clara felt it warm in her hands, almost as though it were breathing. The seal, which had remained unbroken all this time, shimmered, and then, slowly, it dissolved, fading like mist under sunlight. The paper within unfurled itself, not in words inked upon the page, but in light. The villagers watched as glowing threads spilled into the air, drifting upward like fireflies. They rose higher and higher, scattering like seeds in the wind, until the entire square was bathed in a soft, golden radiance. It was not the farewell of one man any longer. It was the farewell of many. It was love spoken aloud at last. And as the last threads of light faded into the sky, the letter in Clara's hands grew still. The paper remained fragile and ordinary once more, but the glow had gone. Its burden had been lifted. Its silence had been broken. The villagers dispersed slowly, their faces softer, their eyes clearer. They spoke to one another with gentleness, as though words weighed less now that they had been freed. Mrs. Alder walked home with her children, holding their hands tightly. Mr. Barrow sat again on his bench, but his posture seemed lighter, as if the years had released some of their hold on him. Clara remained by the fountain. She held the no ordinary envelope against her heart, knowing it had given her village a gift far greater than she could have imagined. For silence could be heavy, yes, but when shared, when broken open, it could also be transformed into something luminous. And Clara understood then that her duty had not been to deliver the letter to a single person. It had been to deliver it to everyone, to remind them and herself that no word of love, apology, or gratitude should remain unsent, because the silence between hearts was always more fragile than it seemed. As the sun climbed higher and the village square filled again with the ordinary hum of life, Clara smiled softly to herself. The letter's glow had lifted, but its lesson remained, and so she carried the memory of it gently within her, like a lantern lit from within, guiding her steps into whatever came next. Keeper of letters. The letter did not vanish. Clara expected that after the glow had lifted, after the voices of the villagers had softened, and the threads of light had dissolved into the morning sky, it might crumble into dust or disappear in her hands. But it did not. When she finally looked down, she found it resting quietly against her palm, its paper cool and fragile, its seal gone, but its presence somehow changed. It no longer felt like a burden. It no longer pressed against her chest with the weight of unsaid sorrow. Instead, it was almost weightless, as though what it carried had been emptied out, leaving only the vessel behind. Clara folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket. It stayed there, close to her heart, quiet but steady, as though reminding her that its story was not finished after all. In the days that followed, the village felt different. The market square, usually filled with the ordinary rhythms of barter and chatter, carried a new softness. The air seemed lighter, as though the storm had washed not just the streets, but the silence that clung to people. Neighbors lingered longer in conversation. Old friends paused when passing one another, hands hovering with words they had once left unspoken but now dared to share. Even laughter, which had always been present, carried a fuller sound, resonant and unafraid. Clara moved among them quietly, her presence greeted with warmth, though no one spoke directly of the morning at the fountain. It was as though the village had made a silent pact to remember, but not to name it too often, for naming might diminish what had been shared. Yet Clara knew that something within her had shifted in a way that could not be undone. The letter in her pocket seemed to hum with possibility. At times, she would take it out, not to open or examine it, for its glow was gone, its secrets already offered to the world, but simply to hold. Each time she did, she felt a faint warmth, as though it was reminding her that it still had purpose. Slowly, she began to understand what that purpose might be. The letter had once carried only one story, a farewell never spoken. Then it had carried the stories of many, each voice folded into its silence until they were released. And now it seemed to carry not words at all, but invitation. It was no longer only the keeper of unsent words. It was a reminder that words, even if written too late, could still find their way into the world. One afternoon, Clara sat in her grandfather's old study, the place where she had first discovered the envelope. The room was still lined with shelves of books, their spines worn, the air rich with the faint scent of ink and paper. Dust floated in thin shafts of sunlight, and the old clock ticked with its steady, familiar rhythm. Clara laid the letter on the desk, beside a clean sheet of paper and a pen. For a long time she stared at both, her hand hovering. Then, with a steady breath, she began to write not to her grandfather as though he were still alive, but to him as he had always been to her, a presence that lingered. She wrote about her gratitude, about the afternoons she had spent listening to his half-finished stories, about the way his silences had comforted her. She wrote the words she had never said, the words she had believed were lost when she finished. She folded the paper carefully and placed it in a small wooden box that had once held her grandfather's postcards. She rested her hand on the lid for a moment, feeling a strange peace. The act of writing, even without an audience, had softened something in her chest. The letter in her pocket seemed to glow faintly, again not with light, but with quiet approval. And Clara realized then that this was what she must do, not only for herself, but for others. The letter had chosen her not to carry one man's farewell, but to keep safe all the farewells and confessions that never found their way to their destination. The next day, she carried the small wooden box to the bookshop at the corner of the village square. The shop was a quiet, comforting place, lined with shelves that seemed to sigh with stories. The bookseller, a kind man with ink-stained fingers and spectacles always sliding down his nose, looked up when Clara entered. She placed the box on the counter and explained softly that she wished to leave it there not as something to sell, but as something to receive. She told him that it was a place for letters that never arrived, words that people carried but had nowhere to set down. The bookseller, after listening in silence, nodded once and placed the box on a table by the window where the morning light fell most often. He did not ask for more explanation. Some things, Clara realized, needed no explaining at first. The box sat quietly, unremarkable, among the rows of books and papers, but slowly, almost shyly, letters began to appear. One morning, Clara found an envelope with no name, only the word brother written across it in hurried script. Another time, she opened the lid and discovered a folded sheet of paper pressed between two flowers, the ink faint, but the words still visible. I forgive you. Over the weeks, more came. Some were long, written with care, and filled with stories that had waited years to be spoken. Others were short, only a line or two, but carrying the weight of lifetimes. Each one was placed in the box without ceremony, slipped in quietly as villagers browsed the shelves or lingered by the window. And each one, Clara believed, lightened the silence of its writer. Even if no one else ever read it, She never opened the letters. That was not her role. She was not the reader of them, nor the messenger. She was only the keeper, the one who made space for what had been unsent. The box grew heavier with time, yet when she lifted it, it always felt curiously light, as though the words inside lifted one another. Some evenings she would sit by the box in the quiet of the shop, her hand resting on its lid, and she would feel again the faint warmth of the first letter in her pocket. She began to think of the box not as wood and hinges, but as a kind of hearth, a place where silences could burn themselves away, turning into a gentle heat that spread through the village. Word of the box spread beyond the village, though no one could say exactly how. Travelers who passed through sometimes stopped at the shop and, before leaving, slipped their own letters inside. A woman on her way to the coast paused long enough to write a note to the father she had left behind. A boy visiting from the city knelt at the window table and scrawled words to the friend he had lost. The box, though small, became a vessel of stories, too many to count, and Clara cared for it with the same reverence she had once given to the glowing letter. The years passed gently, seasons turned, the square filled with the sounds of festivals and farewells, and Clara grew older, but the letter in her pocket remained, always near, always quiet, its paper preserved as though time could not touch it. She carried it not as a relic, but as a reminder of what had begun that rainy night. Sometimes, when she felt unsure, she would take it out and press it between her hands, and the faint warmth would return. She never wrote upon it, never altered it. It was enough that it existed, that it had taught her to listen, to keep, to hold. On the evening of her 30th year, Clara returned to the shop after closing and sat by the box. The room was dim, lit only by the lantern on the counter and the faint silver of the moon outside. She opened the lid and saw the layers of folded papers inside, a chorus of unsent words resting together in silence. She thought then of the man whose farewell had begun it all, of Mrs. Alder's mother, of Mr. Barrow's friend, of the hundreds of unnamed voices who had slipped their secrets into this quiet place. She thought of her grandfather, of the thank you she had written and folded so carefully years ago, and she realized that the box was no longer only a place for farewells. It had become a home for all words that never arrived, for every goodbye and every love that had needed somewhere to rest. Clara closed the lid gently, her hand lingering on the wood. Outside, the night was alive with the soft sounds of the village, footsteps fading, doors closing, laughter echoing faintly from the tavern. She leaned back, closing her eyes. She was not the messenger. She was not the writer. She was only the keeper. And in that quiet role, she had found a peace she had never expected. The letter still rested in her pocket, as light as ever. It would never vanish. She knew now, for it had become part of her. It was not meant to end, only to continue, guiding her as she gave others the chance to let go of what they had carried too long. Clara smiled softly into the dimness. The silence of the village had been broken once, and it would not be forgotten again. And if there were always new words left unsent, always new farewells unfinished, then she would be there, the quiet keeper of letters, holding space for them all. became the keeper of letters that never arrived, giving every goodbye and every love a home. Thank you for joining me tonight on Whispers of the Night. May your dreams be gentle, your rest be deep, and may the words unspoken in your own heart find peace. Good night.